Hello, everyone, and welcome to a podcast episode brought to you by FLO. I'm your host, Gabrielle, and today I'm excited to be joined by Nathan Yang, who's the Chief Product Officer at FLO, and also by Matt Loos, who's a Technical Advisor at FLO. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about EV charging and its impact on the grid. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining the podcast. Very excited for this conversation today.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So to start off, let's go with name, your title, and what it is you do within your industry.
Sure. Maybe I'll start. Nathan Yang, Chief Product Officer. Been in the tech industry for quite some time. In my role as Chief Product, I lead the engineering, software and hardware engineering teams, product management, and design team for FLO.
Yeah, and I'm Matthieu Loos. I'm Technical Advisor. I've been in the EV industry for close to a decade now. My role is really to monitor the technical committees of the industry and make sure we work on cutting edge technology in the future.
Fantastic. Let's go ahead and start with the $1 million question here. Can the grid handle mass EV adoption in North America?
I think there's a lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt being spread in the market about, hey, is the grid ready to accommodate all the EVs that are starting to be produced and now being bought by consumers? And generally speaking, the answer is yes. But there's always a caveat. We have to prepare ourselves knowing that the number of EVs will increase, which also means that the energy demand will also increase accordingly. We think that with the right systems in place, the right rate structures, and as long as an industry we take steps towards it, we can most definitely accommodate the amount of EVs that will be adopted in the marketplace.
To add to Nathan's point, I think there's two considerations when we talk about EVs and the grid. Maybe the first one is electrification of our economy has been happening for the past more than a century now. We started with light, then cooking, fridges, heating came on, then air conditioning, and so on. So we can see it as a continuation of the electrification, and the grid has been growing and adapting to all those kind of new loads. And the second point might be that electric vehicles are very unique. It's literally a battery on wheels. So unlike the other type of loads where you switch them on when you need the lights to be on because you need lights or you need to cook, here you plug in your electric vehicles when you don't need it. You need it to store the energy so you can use it later. And this brings a tremendous amount of flexibility to the grid that we need to work on to leverage appropriately.
Well, now there are a lot of hot takes about what happened recently during the successful demand response efforts that asked people to maybe reduce electrical consumption in California specifically. So in demand to response events, does this mean that people can't charge at all? And does that have a big impact on consumers? Nathan?
It's a great follow-on to what Matthieu was just describing. The vehicles are plugged into the grid or plugged in for a long time, and it doesn't need to charge for the whole amount of time it's plugged in. So, for example, here I plug it at night at home, and it maybe charges 30 minutes, an hour over the course of the entire time that's plugged in. It might be plugged in for 12, 14 hours or even longer. And so that allows for quite a bit of flexibility. And this is where demand response can be helpful, or a specific time of day where you can charge can be helpful. So, for example, if everybody is cooking and washing dishes or doing these things at a peak time, let's say 5, 6, 7 p.m. in the afternoon, well, we could defer the EV charging to be doing it when everybody's sleeping, for example, or when everybody's at work during the day where there might be a surplus of energy. So that's the idea of sort of demand response, and it's a good way in the short term to maybe meet some of those increasing loads on the grid.
In response to that, we're talking about short term here. So how far in the future is short term? What would a short term solution even look like? And how short are we talking actually?
So the interesting thing about EVs is, it's not going to happen overnight, right? Where all the vehicles suddenly on the road would be EVs. And, a typical car, lasts, let's say 8, 10, 12 years, depending on how they're driven. Until the day where 100% of the vehicles are going to be sold are going to be EVs, that's probably going to be another decade plus. So you're looking at a window of a few decades for the time where the transition between current combustion engine vehicles to the majority of vehicles being EVs. And so that's sort of the longer time cycle. We're looking at decades. If you look at a short term, we're talking about a couple of years. And in that short term, maybe to add some clarification, it really depends on where you're located in the United States. California has a lot of natural disasters, for example, recently with the wildfires. And ironically, it's the global warming that's causing these natural disasters, which in turn causes the grid to be less stable. And this lack of stability of the grid exists with EVs or no EVs, right? These are situations where the grid might go down. There's a forest fire. You might not be able to cook, heat, use your electronics in the home, and that's agnostic of EVs. But in that short term for California, this is where things that Matthieu was mentioning is the EV, because it's plugged in, you have a source of energy that's parked there, and it could be used in the short term during natural disasters to even help. And so that's for California specifically. And other parts of the United States or North America, if we focus on North America, they might be less prone to natural disasters. And in those situations, this is where the demand response can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's very important, like what Nathan said about the difference between the territories. Like if we look at California, there's a lot of sun power, there's a lot of wind power. FLO is based in Quebec, where we have a lot of hydroelectricity. So in the short term, the short-term solutions will vary depending on the programs that each individual grids have, even though all the grids are interconnected in North America, but the solutions might be quite localized. Actually, if we look at California, there was an excess of sun power during the day where there was more energy produced by the sun that couldn't be used. I think it's about 200,000 homes that could have been powered by this energy, but hasn't been captured or harnessed. So this is what I think the California government tried to do by telling people do not charge your vehicle between 5 and 10 p.m. It's try to create incentives for people to harness this excess of energy that we have.
So it sounds like there's quite a few things that can be done, a lot of action items that can be crossed off. And, we've talked about how we can be avoiding overwhelming the grid when maybe a lot of drivers switch to EVs. But what about midterm when every driver goes electric?
Yeah, so midterm will be trying to solve more localized solutions. If you look at hydropower, there's no issue of intermittent energy. It's like the hydropower has the benefits of being available all the time. It's very easy to switch on and off, but you need to address those peak demands. Like people will go home and they will plug in their electric vehicles, they will start cooking, and this will increase the existing peak that we have, and we don't want that. So we need to find incentives for people to charge their vehicle at a different time. And it can be done in many different ways. It can be a price signals where the electricity has different price during the day, and the consumer will just adapt based on to minimize their electricity costs. It can be demand response in some situation when the utility has more of a direct control of each vehicles, but they will make sure that for your needs, the vehicle is fully charged or has enough energy when you need it, like in the morning, for example, or even more complex, maybe more long term. And in the situation of California, where you have the sun setting and you have a lack of energy production during the evening where the peak is rising, you may want to use the energy that you store during the day to supply like your home or some appliances because there's a lack of generation there, but you don't need actually your EV. So this is where the electric vehicles becomes much more than a vehicle.
And Nathan, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, no, and I think to sort of take a step back, take that as a foot view, we were talking about, for a short-term demand response, reducing peak demand, time of day charging. And then now, like Matthieu was saying, in the midterm, we're talking about maybe you have some solar panels, maybe you have battery storage, maybe there's other things, microgrid, some people call it, to help further with the transition. And in each situation, we have to remember that it becomes more and more complex in the sense that you have more and more stakeholders or entities that are now involved. So, just demand response is basically utilities telling, a household to say, okay, don't charge your vehicle at this time of day. But when you get to the midterm, as what Matthieu was describing, now you need the car manufacturers to be willing to give power to the house. So the car manufacturers are now involved. There's some bidirectional charging that may or may not be needed there. Now you have solar panel providers that might need to get involved. And all these protocols on how the solar panels, the on-site battery, the vehicles communicate to each other, ideally is done in an industry standard way. So the consumers have more choice. And also it sets ourselves well for also the longer term, where things might be even more utopic, maybe I should describe, where, this idea of fully decarbonized, and so also this notion of, no more fear about the grid or not having power for your house. That future panacea or ideal scenario could potentially be enabled by these industry standard solutions.
Well, this is a great time to transition over to that big picture idea, I think, because we just talked about short term, but now let's kind of transition over to thinking big and long term, because what could fully integrated smart charging eventually look like in this utopia you're talking about? What would be the impact on our society?
It's huge. Most things in our house is already DC powered. So, you have bricks that in your house, probably your laptop, your phone, to convert everything to DC. And most things in our homes are powered by our electronics or powered by batteries. And if you think about your car, if you think about the solar panels, they are inherently DC powered. And if in the future everything is open standards, think about USB ports, think about Ethernet, think about Wi-Fi, those are all standard protocols. Imagine a future where the communication and exchange of power between the batteries in your home, between the devices in your home, between the grid is all standard and all centralized, and they can all talk to each other. While this is, the idea that we could potentially decarbonize almost fully the power that we consume. That means that I can share power to my neighbor. If my neighbor needs power for some reason and something happened to the grid and she or he is unable to get power, that means that in case of natural disasters, we can be more resilient. And so we can, a local area could be self-sufficient while the grid is disrupted. And so this requires, again, a lot of open standards to be developed, and then it implies that the utilities, the residential solar power providers, the residential on-site battery storage providers, car manufacturers, EV charging providers such as ourselves at FLO, that we all collaborate in an open standard way to be able to enable that ideal future.
Matt, what are your thoughts on the long term?
Yeah, that's to add to that. We're probably move from a centralized power plant where you have massive gas generator to more decentralized, where everybody has their own ways of generating, storing, and consuming electricity. So there's also this terminology of you're not a consumer, you're a prosumer, where you would actively participate in the power system. And the beauty of that is that it's extremely reliable, because instead of having just hundreds or a few thousand critical points that manage the stability of the grids, you have millions of them, and so they're very hard to bring down. So the other aspect, and that's where interoperability is important, is yes, we need a way to scale up. Like, there's no one company that will be able to do everything, and we need to have ways so we can add our technology in a very seamless way to a household or to a workplace or a multi-unit residential building.
Well, it seems like all these long-term solutions aren't actually just going to help the grid, but they would also improve and change drastically the way that mobility fits into our lives.
Yeah, I think, if you tell this paradigm of a gas vehicle, you buy a gas vehicle and then you tell someone, oh, this is great, you have a new gasoline vehicle. Just wait, tomorrow I'll come install the gas station in your garage. People would look like, why do I need a gas station in my garage? With electric vehicles, that's a reality. You just refuel at home. You don't need to go to the gas station. And there's so many more of those things that can happen because your vehicle will be connected to a massive power system, energy system, where more and more of those things, to go back to my first point, that we continue to electrify our economy, and your vehicle will be part of this whole ecosystem.
It's all about the user experience at the end of the day. People want convenience. They want peace of mind. Matthieu was mentioning going to the gas station, and it's not the most convenient. It's not the most peace of mind thing, especially during a pandemic. Sometimes you're not on the road as much, so you forget to put gas in your vehicle and such. And everything that we described, from feeling safe at home during a natural disaster, from not being interrupted when there's a power outage, it's really all about the user experience, right? People feel safe, they feel comfortable, it's convenient, it provides peace of mind. And so this ideal thing, yes, we talk about standard protocols, we talk about resiliency, we talk about demand response, solar panels, all these things. But at the end of the day, it's that users forget that there's this whole power thing behind the scenes, and they can just live their lives to the fullest. And I think that's the exciting thing about the future for electrically powered mobility and the future of energy at home.
So at the end of the day, it just comes down to the user experience, and that's the most important part.
That's right.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, that wraps up the conversation for today. So a big thank you to Nathan and Matt for sharing their expert knowledge on all things EV charging and its impact on the grid. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn more, please visit FLO.com and look for this podcast wherever it is you get your podcasts at.